Thank you for tuning in to Grieving Voices. If this is your first time listening, thank you. And if you've been listening for a while now, thank you as well, and welcome back. Today, my guest is Brent Scarpo. He has over 30 years of experience as a national speaker, life coach, producer, writer, director, and casting director in Hollywood. He has worked on such well known films as The Shawshank Redemption, That Thing You Do, Air Force One, and Matilda. Additionally, Brent has presented thousands of programs to high schools, colleges, and corporate America, numbering well over 1 million participants. In addition, Brent was featured on the Today Show storytelling writing contest, Everyone Has a Story, where his story, The Red Balloon, was chosen out of 100,000 entries. The Red Balloon story beautifully depicts the loving relationship of Brent and his mother and their fascination with life after death. Through many conversations, he and his mother created a plan to prove that, in fact, there was life after death, the basis of the Red Balloon story, which has now become his book, The Red Balloon: How to Transform Your Life, One Inspirational Story at a Time. Additionally, Brent is a life coach specializing in millennials, where he takes his years as a former casting director and marries it to his life coaching career and in such programs as the 10 life coaching lessons I learned casting The Shawshank Redemption. Thank you so much for your time and being here today.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I so appreciate being here, and thank you for all that you do.
Yes, thank you for your time. So let's, I guess, start with the red balloon and
Sure.
how this all came to be and about your mom and the loss of your
Yeah.
mom.
Yeah. So my mother, yeah, so I'm an intuitive life coach. Intuitive life coach is somebody that has a high level, or we all have an intuition, but I've actually worked on it. So, it's like anything else in the body. It's a muscle that, once you flex it, once you strengthen it, it just becomes, stronger and stronger and stronger. So, my mom and I are best friends. She's a single mom that raised three kids by herself. Her name is Betty Scarpo. And I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning one night, and I got a message. I got a message that my mother had had cancer, and she had just moved from Warren, Pennsylvania to California, where I was living. She lived a few blocks away from me, actually. And I was so overwhelmed by that feeling that I didn't even go to bed for the rest of the morning. So about 8 o'clock, I called her and I said, "Hey, mom," I said, "when's the last time you've had a physical?" Right? I didn't tell her about the dream. And she said, "Oh, 5 years ago when I left Pennsylvania to come here." And, we, especially I think with women, we have this ability to take care of everybody else but ourselves. And I was like, "Mom, you've got it. Look, I'm making an appointment for you." Right. Well, we made the appointment with my doctor, and everything was hunky dory except for her chest x ray. And that's when we found a dark mass the size of a half dollar. And unfortunately, my mother had lung cancer. So I listened to that voice. I listened to that intuition, right? As an intuitive life coach, I do programming with clients to help them create the best life possible, the best versions of themselves possible. And so I spent about 2.5 years as my mother's primary caregiver. I told her her only job was to, eradicate cancer. And so, I was really grateful because the doctor said, "Boy, had you not come, you probably would have had a lot less time." And so you just kind of went on this journey. And then, it's interesting. My mother was diagnosed in the end of 95. She had all of 96. And then on January 26, 1997, 13 days after her 59th birthday and 6 days after my 33rd birthday, my mother unfortunately passed away. Her cancer just had metastasized to her brain. We did hospice, which is the greatest gift to mankind. I highly recommend for anybody who knows that they have to make a transition that you try to choose hospice as the way to make that transition. And we years and years and years before that, my mother and I, again, we were really good friends. We always talked about things very philosophical. We'd have what we call our weekly breakfasts or lunch, and I'd take her out and we just talk. So we talked about death and dying, something that people really don't talk about, and I think we need to talk about. That's why I said to you earlier, I'm so grateful for what it is that you're doing, because people don't necessarily it's not your top 10, though. In the last couple of years with COVID, we've almost been forced to talk about this. And so I remember my mother's one of her favorite bands is the Beatles, and John Lennon unfortunately had just been assassinated. And I remember looking at the New York Times, and they had talked about how Yoko Ono and he decided that they were going to come up with a sign. So whoever would transition first would bring that sign back. And to them, it was a yellow handkerchief. So I just happened to read the article to my mom, and my mom goes, "We should do that." I'm like, "We should?" She's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Oh." I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, how do we do? What are we going to do?" She said, "Well, let's pick a sign. We're just going to, you and I, that's it. And let's just say that, the person's responsible for bringing it back to the other person. It means that everything we've talked about, that there is life after death, that there is a higher power of some sort, that there is an essence of who it is that you are as far as your soul is concerned when it leaves this earthly body is all true." I said, "Okay." And so we decided on a red balloon. And primarily because when I was in second grade, there's this wonderful French film um, called La Rouge Ballon, and it won an Oscar. It's phenomenal. And I said, "Let's just do a red balloon." She said, "Okay." And she said, "But," and this is my mother, she said, "it has to show up within 24 hours of the person's death." It's like, none of this a month from now, 6 years from now, 6 months, and no, 24 hours. I was like, "Okay, let's let's do that." So we had always had this in the backbone of our mind. We never shared it with anybody. And then as my mother was entering her transitional phase in hospice, my grandmother came out, my sister and brother, and I was like, I kind of remembered it. And I, finally, as we were getting closer, I thought I better set everybody down and kind of tell them what we did, X amount of years ago, just in case I'm not there when it happens. The last thing I need is, my grandmother, who was 82 at the time, to have a red balloon appear in front of her have a heart attack, and I got two dead people in my hands. I mean, it was getting close. So I sat him down. I said, "Look, Mom and I did this thing, and if anything just kind of quirky happens, the lights go on and off, or just know it's her." And I remember my grandmother saying, "Well, what was the sign?" I said, I just can't tell you." I said, I just we've kept it for so many years. So I was doing a play called The Boys Next Door, where I played the part of a schizophrenic. Trust me, I had plenty to draw from. And I was really wondering, when my mother passed in the middle of the run. I told the director, I said, "Look, I know the show must go on, but I might have just a few little hiccups." The final night, I was in Long Beach, California. I was living in Montrose at the time, about a 2.5 hour drive. Curtain came down, last show. I'm driving home. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. It's pouring down rain, I remember, because it doesn't rain in California. And this is back in the days of beepers. Remember those? And my sister paged me, right? And I pulled off to the side of the road because there was no iPhones, and called her, and she said, "Mom just passed away." And I was like, wow, you know, the last curtain call. So got home and walked in. My grandmother and my sister were there. And, I'm the oldest of three kids. So, I think a lot of how we grieve is also based on so many factors, whether we're men, whether we're women, whether the oldest child, the youngest child, whether we had a relationship with the person that you passed or didn't. What kind of relationship was it? As you well know, there's so many factors. So, I made sure that they were okay. And then, you're walking over to your dead mother, 59 years old, my best friend. And I just didn't know how I was going to handle this. This is my first experience with this, right? As I said to many people, my mother's never died before, So I walk over, and as it's depicted in the Today Show, I leaned over to kiss her on the forehead, and as I went to do that, because she had the hospital sheet up to about her chest, I just saw this little flicker of color. I don't know why I noticed it, but I did. And for some reason, I took my hands, I pulled the sheet down, and there imprinted on my mother's blue sweatshirt was this huge bouquet of red balloons. I literally went from pure pain, like I've never felt, and grief that I was about to feel, to ecstatic joy. And I was so taken back. I was like, "Oh my God. Oh my God." I said, oh my God, you did it. And I was screaming around the room. I was like, you did it. Oh my God. Like my mother didn't wait 24 hours. She waited 24 seconds, right? She didn't, I mean, this was her personality. And I remember my grandmother yelling at me, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? I said, the sign, the sign. Remember what I told you about? She said, yes, it's a red balloon. Where did this sweatshirt come from, right? Because I lived above my sister. My sister was the medical caretaker. So she did all the morphine and all that crazy stuff. And my sister said, oh my God. My mother had been in hospice for about 36 days. And my sister got up that morning and she realized that she hadn't really changed my mother in about 3, 4 days. And my mother was fastidious about changing her clothes and being clean. So she's like, oh, and she couldn't do it by herself. So she called the nurse. She says, is there any way you can stop by today, this morning and help me, change mom and bathe her? And the nurse like, we're so sorry, but we have a major emergency here at the hospital. I can't. So my sister, being my sister, got really frustrated. She walked into her bedroom. She picked up the first sweatshirt that was on top of the pile that I brought 36 days ago from upstairs because she was living, my mom, with me. She just wrangled her top off, put that top on, decided that she wasn't even going to try and do the bottoms, and that was the shirt. And that night is when my mother passed away.
Wow.
I know.
I had goosebumps as you were sharing.
It's just, and I will say this to you as well, and I shared with you that, the Red Balloon book, it's a life coaching book. It's taken me 10 years to do. It's going to come out on Mother's Day. It's official, Mother's Day of 2022, because I've been working on this, as I say, bottle of wine for 10 years. So when we uncork it, it's going to be delicious kind of deal. But I'm going to do an added book on, just step-by-step instruction on how you can do this as well. Because one of the things that we did is, just to prove all this, because I said to my mom, I said, well, if we can't say anything to anybody, how are they going to believe us, right? And she said, oh no, she brought that up as well. And I said, I have this idea. So I wrote out the scenario, the red balloon and all that. I put it in an envelope. I mailed it to she and I, and then it was post stamped. Right. So then after we were done and we were going through that grieving process, and these are these tokens that you have in an effort to get through the grieving process, I just at one point in time, decided to open it up and share it with everybody in my immediate family. And it's like, look, this is what we did, during the death of John Lennon. And, we've been planning this for years. And it was really nice. And, there was a number of witnesses, which I'm really grateful for. And then my mother chose to be cremated. And, I remember the crematorium saying, is there anything you want in with her? I guess you can do certain. And I decided to do that letter. We'd all seen it and people. And so I said, yeah, I had this letter that I'd like to give you. So it was, I don't know, it just gave me a lot of peace. It helped me with my grieving process. It was something that we did very proactive. And the beauty of this is that, this is something anybody can do. Anybody can do. Even since then, I can't even believe, I mean, there's a whole book just on red balloon sightings I've had since 1997, hundreds. Whenever I'm feeling a little down, I'll say, Mom, if I could get a red balloon, this would be really great, right? It just happened recently. I was actually on my computer here, and I had asked for it a couple of days ago, and I turned around and the TV's on, and there's this old show, Hogan's Heroes. Well, it was my mother's favorite, one of her favorite shows. And there's Schultz, literally with a bouquet of red balloons in his hand and a teddy bear. And thank God I grabbed my phone and I took a picture of it and I put it on Facebook. I said, for all my red balloon fans, yet again, my mother proves that there is life after death. So it's been an amazing journey that I'm really excited about sharing with the overall public next year, because the goal is to have the book come out, tour all over the United States, raise monies for charities, and just get people to be a little bit more at peace with this thing called grieving and death and dying, and that you can plan for it. People just write a will and they think that's all you can do. No, there's so much more you can do.
And as an end of life doula, I can say too that you have a lot of choice in that, because there are things that you can do or add into the dying process as the person dying of
Right.
I mean, down to what you want the environment like. Who do you
Right.
want to visit you or not visit you?
Yep.
You know, what kind of legacy you can create a legacy project as a family. And in a way, like that's kind of what you did, like this legacy, not a project, but this legacy that became a project, right? It was this idea that is now almost a legacy project in a way.
Yeah, we were, yeah, like we didn't know what we were doing. You know, my mother was one of those
Right.
people. Yeah, we just kind of did. I mean, I've seen now. You look at, here we are in 2021, and I did something. Well, nobody knows this. You'll be the first to hear this. So I I spoke to you earlier that I have this adopted grandmother, and unfortunately, she passed away on Valentine's Day from COVID and some other complications. And I've known her for 26 years. And as you well know, you know, the grieving process doesn't have to be over a human being. It could be over a puppy. It could over be your 401k just went down to zero. It could
Mhm.
be, you know, a best friend, or, you know, so many different types of losses, a divorce. And so I came out here just because I had promised the Edna, who's the adopted grandmother, that I would look in on their daughter. They have an only child, and then the two granddaughters. So I've been here for a couple months, but it didn't start out that way because I live in Palm Springs and I'm from Warren, Pennsylvania. So I got here and I drove. Right, I drove all 2,467 miles, and I've been to my mother's grave site, which is this, you know, tiny little town. It's got a hill. You know, the first year, to your point, you know, we did the candles. She paid for the candles on her on the day she died, her birthday. We did the wreath during Christmas, and I think we did that for the first 2 years. And then I've been back a couple different times because it's, you know, it's on the other side of the United States. But my goal really was to visit her because I realized that January 26th will be 25 years, right? So to your point, not only can you plan before you pass away, then during the process, what do you want that to look like or be like? You know, I was just flying off the seat of my pants. One of the, to your point, environmental things I did was, she will never be alone. Right, there will be somebody around her holding her hand 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, through the entire process until she dies. She will never, she'll, I said to people who volunteer, do not walk out and have a cigarette. She cannot be left alone for, you know, for 10 seconds is 20 seconds too long. Right, it's just, that was sort of the, some of the parameters that I put together, not knowing there are other things that you can do. And so I realized I was about 7.5 hours away from here. So I just got back and I went and visited my mother. And I'm going to actually put it on Facebook and YouTube and such on January 26th. But, you know, here we are 25 years later, and I went to her gravesite and it's overgrown. You know, the bronze is all just as dark as it could be. And I remember, you know, going on to YouTube, and there's really great organizations that go to VA cemeteries and headstones, and they just redo them, you know, for the military. And so I got these great ideas. So I spent 3 days, and let me tell you, my mother's gravesite is the bomb. It's just beautiful. It's like, but again, you know, because she was cremated, so her ashes are there. But for me, it was yet another way of being able to process my feelings. Here we are 25 years later. Clearly, I've gone through the 7 stages of grief. But I look at this now, and it's, I mean, might I say, it is the most beautiful grave site in the entire War Memorial Cemetery. Because, you know, but you can do that. So there's a before, there's a during, and there's an after.
I'm just curious. So she was a veteran
No,
or your
so no,
the
so it's a great
father?
question. No, so what I did was, is I was just going to go visit her. That's it, right? And then there's this website called findagrave.com. Right. So because I worked in the entertainment industry for many years, you literally can go onto this website. It's completely free of charge. And you can find, I'm telling you, pretty much anybody's grave, anybody's, celebrity or non-celebrity. And so, you know, I've seen, like, you know, different celebrities and things, and I know there's YouTube videos, and I'm, you know, this is me, but I love cemeteries. I love walking in because I think it's quiet, and I love when it says 1609 to 17 something. It's just, I don't know, there's something peaceful for me. It's my thing. So I thought, well, I wonder if my mother's is there. So it was. Somebody took a picture and they put it up there. And I remember just seeing how dilapidated it was. So I was like, okay, I'm going to drive out there. It's their 25th memorial. And so God bless YouTube. I went on there just to see, well, how do you clean the bronze? So there was this guy, and there's these groups, and what they do is they travel all over the United States and they specifically clean military headstones. And I saw that YouTube, and I just saw the techniques that they use. So it was that YouTube that sparked the idea for me. But I thought, how wonderful, there's actually organizations all over the country, and they just volunteer and they go to all these different, vet memorials and headstones, and I've seen dozens and dozens and dozens of them. So no, she wasn't a vet, but when I was researching, and I saw, you get this bottle of this stuff, you do this, use this scrub. If it's bronze, you do this. If it's a headstone, you do this. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm taking notes down. And I literally had all my stuff put in the back of the car, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
That's a really good tip. And I'm actually going to, if you can send me that link, I'll put it in the show notes for others to
Oh, find a grave.
reference. Yeah. Well,
Oh
to
yeah,
find a grave, but also that the tutorial on how to
oh yeah, it's
paint.
great.
Is that
I'm telling you, I looked at probably half a dozen, and this one right before I left, because for the most part, my mother's it's a bronze plaque that's in the ground versus a headstone, but they have that. But I mean, they tell you, like, to get 25 years of organic matter off the concrete, there's a certain formula you use, and then cutting it away. And then there's this guy, he's got the tombstone cleaner starter kit. So I bought that off of Amazon.com, and so he's got the before and after pictures. But yeah, I'll send you a bunch of links. There's just, I mean, it's weird. You think that like in my brain, I'm like, no one does this, but I'm going to do it. And then because of technology, where we can use technology to our advantage versus our disadvantage, you go online, and I'm telling you, probably saw a dozen people. There was these two ladies. They were funny as all caboot, and they did a whole, they had to edit it, right? What step by step, they brought out a picnic basket, they did the blanket, they sprayed the thing. They're like, oh my gosh, this really smells bad. No wonder it cleans everything off. I mean, it really, for what is, could be a very sad time, and then the before after pictures. And there was this one I looked at. Oh, this was really, again, for me, it was really nice to do this because it helps me process my own feelings in regards to having, her been passed for 25 years. So I saw one more, and the guy was doing the whole thing, cut around the grass, get a spatula or whatever, the garden, and do all this. And then he was redoing his son's marker, because his son passed when he was like 2 or 3. So it's like, oh my gosh. So and it wasn't bad, but he got rid of all the grass, and then he dug like a 4-inch trench around the entire marker, and he lined it with this netting, and then he put in white gravel. And I was like, oh, that's what I'm doing. It's like, it was so beautiful. And then I don't know if I can even do this. Let's just see what we can do with technology, if it's even possible. All right, we'll see if we can see. We'll see if we can see this on the on wonderful YouTube, right? So I don't know if that can even be seen. Probably not. A little bit.
kind of,
That
I'll link
kind
to it though. I'll link to it.
Okay, that'll be great. And then I'll send you the pictures and such. And that's what it turned out to be.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the before and after. But yeah, I'll send you the pictures, and you can post them however you like, so people can see this is yet another thing that you can do afterwards. And just I was on an all-time high for a good 3, 4, 5 days, because it took so much work, and it really was painful, but it was also joyful at the same time, and it was arduous, but it just felt so good to be able to do that for her 25 years later.
Well, and I think it's a good point to mention, just because the fact, especially if you're the caregiver or caretaker of someone, and grief in of itself is, if you think of grief, like a change in behavior, like a familiar pattern of behavior. And so if you wake up every day and your first thought is what you're going to do or what you need to do to care for your loved one who's dying, and then they pass away and you wake up the days after that, that is a change in your behavior. You're no longer waking up to care for that person.
Yeah.
And so that's added grief, right? Like, what do you do with you took, some may find some relief, and then you also, but then again, that can be conflicting because you feel bad then because you're relieved because that that responsibility is no longer there, and you feel guilty because that responsibility is no longer there.
Well, and even to your point, I'll be very transparent. So one of the things that I did is, as my mom was going through hospice and they were wonderful, they gave us the names and numbers of different grief groups. And I chose I made a conscious choice. And I don't care if it's a grief group, I don't care if it's a life coach such as me, but the greatest advice I can give any person that goes through the grieving process, I don't care what it is that you lose, is not to do it alone. Do not do it alone. I went to grief therapy once a week with this wonderful chaplain. I went to group therapy 1 to 2 times a week for 2 years, right? And I just said, I have that. That was like my gift to myself, right? Because I spent 2.5 years, working with my mom. And then it was just sort of amazing what you find out. To your point, I had this job. This was a job for 2.5 years, caring for my mother day and night, right? And then when it was done, I was like, what do I do now? Like I had gotten a rhythm. I hardly slept. My immune system was on an all-time high. And I remember when she finally passed and I, got to the gravesite, came back to California about 2.5 weeks later, never been so sick. My immune system just said, okay, you've been on this roll, dude, for 2.5 years. We need to relax. And, again, I just employ all your listeners that just don't do it alone. I mean, I think the greatest emotional challenge I faced in my grieving process was, and I didn't really know this consciously, but it came up and it was painful, is that I realized that in my mind that I had failed. See, as my mother's caregiver, my unconscious said to me, your job is to save her. Well, I failed. And I'm a man. So that just adds a lot of, stuff and layers because, we're the we're the cavemen that go out there and we get the food and we help out the family, and that's our role. And I really struggled with the idea that I didn't save my mom. And then through really great counselors and such, I came to realize it wasn't my job to save my mother from cancer. What my job was to love her as best as I possibly could. And then finally came to the understanding that in that job, I was quite successful.
That's a very good reframe. Just imagine how many people are torturing themselves with
Oh,
that same story.
it's when that came up, I mean, I can see the chaplain and, and she was just, this quiet, demure kind of woman. And she's like, well, do you ever blame yourself for not, that your mom died? And I was like, okay, I never really addressed that question before. Why is that coming up? Right. And then all these feelings just came up and I was like, oh, yes, I'm the oldest child. I'm, my mom's a single mom. There's no husband or father. And of course I'm supposed to save her. And yes, I failed. And then through working with her, we were able to reframe it in a way that wasn't my job. Is it our job to save the person that's going through this process, or is it our job just to love them and be with them as best as we possibly can?
Yeah. So growing up, you mentioned it was a single household and things, and so your dad was never in the picture.
Yeah, so my parents divorced when I was 4. I was born in Pennsylvania, raised in California, but my father was a alcoholic, unfortunately, and a bit of a narcissist. And so my mom being, and this is the late '60s or early '60s rather. Uh, and so, she took it upon herself. I have 3 children. I need to be there and have their best interests in mind. And so then she moved all of us back to Pennsylvania where her parents lived. And so, yeah, he was never really in the picture. There's one story about him, which is probably another show, because he did show up one time, which was a very interesting time when I was 21. But no, for the most part, she was a single woman that raised three kids by herself, way before the internet, way before, all that stuff. I like to say that she paved the road for a lot of these women that, are trying to get child support from, the various people that keep evading it for some reason, and, laying down the laws that were necessary so that, these, women and men can make sure that, they're getting the support that they need, both, financially, emotionally, psychologically, physically, from the relationship.
Did any of those feelings from that loss of not having him in your life, come up when your mom passed?
It's a great question. No, and I think it's so funny. I really haven't addressed this. When I moved to California, which was in 1985, it was a couple of years after that my mother had called me, and she said, "I know this will sound a little strange, but I got a call from one of the relatives, and your father passed away." Right?
Mm.
And I was like, "Oh, okay," and so I again, I have memories of him from 0 to 4, but never really had any kind of time with him. And so I shared that with my sister. The interesting thing is that my sister just burst into tears, which that sort of blew my mind. And then for me, and we sat and talked, she and I, we processed it together. And I think because she's the only girl, uh there was never that daddy figure. There was never that father figure that I know girls really long for. And I think her grieving process was the possibility that that could be. And now that was gone. For me, it was interesting because on one part I thought, should I be crying? It's like, because I'm not, and I explored and I thought, well, I don't have any time with this. I don't have life experiences with this person. I don't have memories of this person. So, I don't have the ability to grieve over something that did not exist. Right. Was I sorry they died? Sure. But to answer your question, I don't think so, because he had passed, and because I reconciled all of that. Um, there really wasn't, he was so out of my mind now that I think about it. I mean, that was the last person I was thinking about. My focus was really about this woman who, left this man to take on the responsibility of raising three children as best as she possibly can. And for me, it was like, okay, I'm going to, I'll share this story with you, which I think epitomizes this. And I think, because, you know, there are two types of dying, as you know, the one we know that's coming and the one that's a surprise. I had a friend that died in the Twin Towers. That was a shock. That was a surprise, right? My mother had 36 days in hospice. We could prepare for that, right? So those are the two forms of dying. And I remember when the neurologist came in and said, look, your mother's lung cancer has metastasized to her brain, and there's nothing we can do. The worst sentence in the human language, I think. And so, you wrap your head around what that means. It's like, oh, she's gonna die. Okay, you didn't say it out loud, but I with I got what you were inferring here, right? So, you go through the process of what you're going to do. And so, because of my mother's insurance and such, she said, well, you can do, we can put her in a nursing home that, deals with this kind of thing, or you can do hospice. I had never heard of hospice before, right? So we get all the details, and I sit down with my sister and brother because, this is where then it gets really sticky, because depending on your family dynamics, depending on how much money there is, depending on what your morals and values and ethics are, each person that comes to the table when you have this transition. So I remember sitting down with them and saying, this is going to happen. How do we want this to happen? And I decided as the oldest that we just be very democratic, and whatever, the 2 out of 3, versus it being my way, because I know me. So I said, well, what do you think? My sister, oh, nursing home. My brother goes, yeah, nursing home. I'm like, oh my God. Like, that's the last thing my mother wanted. I said, well, mom never wanted to be in a, she said, if anything should ever happen, please, oh God, don't put me in a nursing home. Well, they, just decided to forget that part. Right. So I sat down and we just had the dialogue and the dialogue and the dialogue about it. And I knew, right, just with my work, I knew that it wasn't about my mother going into hospice and or going into a nursing home. What it was about was the fear that they were going to face if she was going to be in hospice and actually being proactive in the process. So if you put her in a nursing home, then somebody else does it.
Mhm.
If you put it right. And I went, okay. So this is what I said to them. And it worked. And I don't even know, this is my intuitive self. I said, look, I'll make you a deal, because we were at an impasse. I'll lead this. You don't have to be there 24/7, but I want your assistance. I want you to be there because I want you to be part of the process. I'll lead this. Let's just do this. Let's do hospice. Let's do hospice this time. And then I said, and the time mom dies, we'll do the nursing home. And they just looked at me. And he's like, what do you mean? I said, because this is the first time she's going to do this. And we get one chance. And I'm just afraid we're going to pick the wrong one. And they decided that we would do hospice.
Wow. That's a good reframe too.
I specialize in reframing. It just was like, oh, so yeah.
Oh. So the process, and the reason why I asked about your father and stuff is because grief is cumulative and it's cumulatively negative. And I know you said that, your grief experience with that was very different from your sister's. And you had mentioned something, and I just want to come back to it because I think it's important for anyone listening. And what you had said was you can't grieve something or someone that wasn't there. To that effect, you had said.
Yeah. And what I mean by there is that, so much of our grief comes out of the memories and the life experiences that we had with the individual, right?
Mhm.
That whole process, the birthday parties, the vacations, all that stuff, right? My father wasn't in my life. Like, I didn't have those experiences. I never talked to him. I remember at 4 and that's it. So there's this space that has no life experiences whatsoever with him. So there's no memories of being able to say, oh my gosh, I miss when he put me on his shoulders and we went to the playground together. Now, I had already, I think in my mind, dealt with the grief of not having a father, right? And especially going in the 60s, because, look, when I was in first grade, there were 32 students. I'll never forget this, Irvindale Elementary School. There were 32 students. Out of 32 students in 1968, I was the only one that came from divorced parents. Now, look at it. There's probably
Wow.
1 or 2 people that even have parents that are still together out of the same number. So for me, I think I went through the grieving process of realizing that I was not going to have a father over the course of time of my, teen years and early adult years. So by the time I learned that he died, I had been through those 7 stages, right? The whole shock and denial and pain and guilt. And, well, why don't I have a father? And my mom and I, we had dozens and dozens and dozens of conversations about my dad. Right. So she was very open and transparent, authentic about that, what it was about. So I think by the time I got to that, I was good because I had gone through those stages of what it meant not to have a father in my life. Whereas my sister hadn't. My sister was still holding on to, the hope that he was going to come back. And so when that hope.
Yeah, and that's what
Yeah.
I wanted to mention is
Oh, yeah,
because
please.
grief is the loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations.
Oh,
And
right.
anything we wish would have been different, better, or more.
Well said.
Yeah.
That you
So
just described my sister right there.
yeah, exactly. So that's why I just kind of wanted to circle back to that. Why some
No, it's
people,
brilliant.
and because everybody's relationship is unique and individual, right?
Right.
So even, that's where 2 people in the same household can have very different experiences.
I was shocked when she burst into tears. I was like, because and then my sister's a very controlling individual. She controls her emotions very, very well. So not only was it that she cried, but I was like, you don't cry Like, this is okay, I need to sit down. I am sitting down, and she sat down. I said, okay, we got to process this a little bit. So, but to what you just shared, you're absolutely correct.
And you said something there, and I want to highlight this too, is that at some point with grief, either we implode or we explode. And so that full expression, that unexpected expression of grief could have been years. And where I'm not analyzing or judging, but I just to give people an understanding of why that could happen or where that comes from is when we spend so many years stuffing, we either implode or we explode. Either our health deteriorates or we outwardly express it with anger, turning to food or drugs or alcohol
Right.
or relationships, things like that. And so I just wanted to highlight that too for people listening.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think even in my 2 years of my grieving, there was not drugs or anything like that, but there were, I think we all adopt certain behaviors in an effort to deal with, whatever particularly is happening in our lives emotionally, especially as it relates to grieving. So I think we all have that. It's just, it to our earlier conversation, this is why I say, don't do this alone, right? To isolate yourself and sit in the dark with the lights off and just mourn over the person that you loved. I mean, I remember, and it was so telling. I remember when my mom passed, right? And then, we had the number we call, they come and pick her up. And it was just such a great experience because it was my grandmother, my sister, and my mother, and the two gentlemen that came to take, my mother's body, when we're just sitting there, like, I've never done this before. And he said, listen, may I make a suggestion? And I said, sure. He said, why don't you spend some time with her? But then I'm going to suggest that maybe you go into the bedroom, because what we have to do to prepare her may not want to be the last memory you have of her. And I was like, I got it, right? I seen enough movies, and I was like, okay, yeah. So we did our thing, went inside the bedroom, right? Sat there for about 10 minutes. He knocked on the door. He said, we've taken her and we will take care of her. I mean, he was so amazing. I mean, these are the two guys that take her to the morgue. That's what they do. But how he did it was just so amazing. So by that time, then the nurse came in, and she was sitting us down, talking all that. And so she said, "Where?" Which, again, when she said it was weird, she said, "Where is all the medicine and the morphine and such?" And I said, "Oh, I have it all organized over here." Right. The next thing I knew, she took out this garbage bag and she started going rifling through our stuff, what we paid for, in the bag, taking the pills and the morphine and I said, "Excuse me, what are you doing?" She says, "Oh, we have to take this." I said, "No, you don't." I said, "That's our stuff. We paid for." "No, we have to take it. When you signed that you were going to do hospice, this is part of the process." I said, "Well, you really need to explain yourself." And she sat me down. She said, because we have so many instances where the husband loses the wife and then they make the call and we come back to two bodies. So we're going to take away everything that may allow you to cause harm to yourself. And then she gives you the numbers of the counselors and the grief therapy and the chaplain, right? What a learning curve. What I was like, wow.
Yeah, I never actually my end of life doula training, that was one thing that wasn't said actually.
So
So
I would add that if I were
yeah.
you.
But
Yeah.
one thing that was said was, as the loved ones and the person that's going to be transitioning, you can choose to wash their body.
Right.
And, as a person dying, you can choose if you want your body washed or not. And do you want your whole body washed or just your face and I think that's where it's not, I think we are so afraid of the dying process in
Of
general.
course.
I think hospice actually gives an opportunity to be a part of the process.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think I, in the 2 years that I did the grief therapy and such, I remember being on, it was some kind of, well, it wouldn't be a webinar, but they were able to put it together. But I remember whoever invented hospice, they were doing this talk. They were one of the guests, and it was just fascinating to hear this person back in the day. Because I was really in it to win it. At that time, I was like, okay, I'm going through this process. I'm, didn't become a grief counselor per se, but took courses to allow me to at least help facilitate and such. So it's you're right. It's amazing. It gives you, it gives you that ability to be to be proactive versus we could just come to a nursing home and we go and visit her for an hour each day. And then we come home and we live our lives. But to me, that would just have added more angst to the grief process for us had we chosen that route.
I'm going to share something too, just because I have a podcast episode coming out soon with Ken Ross. And by the time this airs, I'll link to it in the show notes. But Ken Ross is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's son. And I think who you're talking about is his mother. Because
Yes.
she was the pioneer
Yes,
of
yes,
hospice.
yes. That's exactly right. I love the synchronistic moment that we're having right now. I couldn't pull it.
Oh, lost sound.
Are we back?
Yes, we are back.
Yeah. It was you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely, I remember it so well.
She was the trailblazer for hospice and palliative care. But actually, you said too, the 7 stages of grief, and she's known for the 5 stages.
The 5 stages, exactly right.
But it's actually not 5 stages. It's actually, she talked about 10 different emotions, because really they're not even stages. They're kind of like these, like an emotional scale that doesn't go in like this linear.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, because of the 2 years that I spent, so to your point, ironically, we were able to bring this all together. It was the 5. And then, as I continued to do research, it was like the 7. And then, that this is not, this is more like what did someone called it? What's a universal roller coaster where, you go up and then to the side and then you go back again. And then you get to the top and then the roller coaster goes in reverse and you're at 1 and then you go to 7, then you go to 3. And it's all individualistic.
Her work, and Ken and I talked about this too. There's so much more to her work than that.
I bet
it was talked about so much at one point, she just didn't even want to talk about it. Like, it was like, that's all anybody, like social, like the media.
Yes.
That's what everybody latched on.
That was her brand. That was her brand.
And her work was just so much more than that.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll
have to listen to that. I'm excited. You have to send that to me.
Yeah. That's next week, Tuesday. It's coming out.
Oh, nice. Okay. I will be there.
Actually, not next week, Tuesday. Today's Monday. Tomorrow.
Mañana. Okay. I got it on my list of things to do.
Okay. So back to you. And I'm going to share this because, I meant to share this earlier when you were talking about red balloon, and we'll circle back to that. Because I had a psychic medium reading for the first time earlier this year. And it was, my dad passed away when I was 8. So it's been well over 30 years. And I had never had a reading. And so one of the things I had asked for after that reading, which was, I think, in April of this year, if I'm remembering correctly, just maybe 2 months after that, I had asked for a red balloon. I did not get it. I did not get it or see it or be open to seeing it until you submitted your application to be on my podcast.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm curious if you're open to this. You don't have to share. Can I ask who your medium was, who did the reading?
Siri Burnson. She was I did a podcast interview with her. She was on my podcast too.
Okay. So we're really going to have a synchronistic moment here. So one of the reasons, but I live in Warren, Pennsylvania. And so we're really close. We're about maybe 20 minutes away from the New York State borderline. And there's this little town called Lilydale, New York. Lilydale has been around for years. It's considered one of the top 10 psychic towns in the United States. And my mother and her best friend would always go there. I mean, they've got the mediums, they've got the psychics, all that. And now they do workshops and they have a conservatory. I mean, it's just incredible. So my mother was very much into it. So we share this. Fast forward, I moved to California. And I'm a believer in many paths. You just have to prove it to me. I mean, seriously. And this is also featured in my book. So there's a whole thread, but a really good friend of mine said, she's like, look, there's this guy, his name is James von Prague. He is this evidential medium. And, I met him recently. I think you'd really like him. And so long story short, James von Prague, who's written 10 New York Times bestseller books, in the late, probably 80s, early 90s, he was the guy. He had his own talk show. I mean, just phenomenal. But he at that time was just this guy that was doing, like, to your point, he was doing readings. And she called my friend. She said, oh, he's doing this gathering, let's go. And it would be these gatherings of 400 or 500 people. He would do samplings, and then people would hire him to do readings at his home. So I signed up. What the heck? It was fascinating. So this was in, let me see, I gotta get this right here, 94, 93, 92, like around 1990. So I do my reading, right? It's all tape recorded and such, and it was phenomenal. It was phenomenal because he's an evidential medium, and there are cons and there are real people, there are scams, and I do believe people have gifts. But what was really interesting is that I pulled up in front of his house in Hollywood, and he lived in a seedy area of Hollywood. It was in East Hollywood. And I just sat there and I was like, oh, this is going to be really, whew, kind of deal, And so, and my father had passed by this time, and my mother had moved to California. So I go up, I knock at the door, he opens the door. He's a short little man with a mustache, and he said, oh, come in. I just get a glass of water. This is pre-computers, right? Because now it's a little difficult in terms of authenticity, because everyone blames psychics for Googling people, right? Because we can do that now. There was no Google, there was nothing, there was no computer. I mean, very little computers. So we sat down, we light the candle, we do the prayer, and he looks at me and he goes, are you a little nervous? And I said, well, I'm open to this. Trust me. He knew about Lilydale. He said, well, your father's here. Well, that was the last person that I thought was going to come through. I was like, and he's saying to you that you sat outside for about 20 minutes because you're worried about what would happen if your dad came. I sat outside for 20 minutes in the car thinking that very thought. Right. And then he kept saying things that like nobody knew, like nobody on the planet knew but me. And to me, it was really interesting because clearly in the spirit world, there is no sense of time, because your dad, he said, oh my God, your dad's laughing. So what is he laughing at? He said he's laughing because, he saw you sneaking out the bedroom window and sitting on the roof looking at the stars. Well, I did that when I was 7, but they divorced when I was 4. I said, well, how does he know that? He said, oh, time is there's no such. I was like, and nobody know. I never even told my mother I used to do that. Right. Well, then we get done and he goes, we're in the middle of it. And he said, hey, do you need a job? I said, excuse me? He said, well, my 13-foot Indian guy just got in the front of the line of the people that are here to see you and said, I'm supposed to give you a job. Let's talk about it afterwards. I became James von Prague's first personal assistant for 2 years.
I
So
think I read that.
yeah, my path has been very interesting. I mean, I remember the last appointment, because then I was going on to doing Shawshank Redemption, right? And had to put my notice in. The last appointment, he said, listen, I have someone coming. I said, okay, I'm gonna go take a walk. And so there's a knock on the door, and I open the door, and there stands Cher. And she's like, do I have the right place? Is this James von Prague? And I said, oh, Miss Cher, because I didn't know her last name. I said, yes, you do. And she said, and she had a Jaguar. She said, is my car safe out there? And I said, oh, I'll watch it. Don't worry about it. So got her in, sat her down, got her some water. James came, took her upstairs, did her thing. I watched her Jaguar, and that was my last time working with him. But for 2 years, I worked with him, and he taught me, and I experienced all of that. So yeah.
So do you feel like, I mean, intuition, like as a kid, like did you have, because
I
you said you've
did.
worked on it, but like so
Yes.
many of us, and especially when we're grieving or in grief, it's really hard for us to tap into our intuition.
Well, it's not hard to tap into it because it's always there, right? What's difficult is believing that you have it.
Our brain gets in the
Yeah.
way.
Oh, we all have it. I do this with my life coaching clients all the time. So I'll give you great examples, because this is what I try to do is that they'll hire me and I say, well, you have all the answers. You're just not listening to them. They're like, what do you mean? I said, no, you do. We all do. But do
Mhm.
we choose to listen? Do we choose, look, I remember when James did a reading and he had this guy. And what I loved about James is if he says it's you and there's a woman here that has a pocket of coins that you used to collect, and he will not deviate, right? If the guy said, no, that's not me, he goes, no, it's you, right? And I remember this one time, this guy, nope, it's not me, it's not me, it's not me, it's not me. We get done 2 hours, right? People are like, all over James and such. And I remember seeing the guy off to the right. And he waited for probably a good half hour. Everyone leaves. He comes over and James and he talk. He said, listen, all that really did happen. I was just afraid to say something. So to your point, um, yeah, this is in the book as well. I knew my mother was going to die at a young age. I've always known. I've known it since I was 13 years old. I didn't share it with anybody. This will be in fact, in the book, and this podcast is probably the first. I mean, I've said it to a few people when I speak, but I remember my mother and I got into an argument, and I could see things. So since I was like 6 years old, like I could see the future. Those sort of premonitions. Like I would just like know things about people. It was just the scariest and oddest thing growing up in a small town in Warren, Pennsylvania. But I just kind of kept it to myself. And my mother and I, when I was 13, we just moved to this new house, and I got in this huge argument with her, and I was mad, and I ran out of the house to go across the street to play with some friends. And I got halfway across the street, and I remember getting to the other side, to the sidewalk, and I just collapsed, and I just burst into tears, and I knew, I could feel, I was like, because I heard this message saying, you need to be kind to your mother because she's not going to be around long. And I saw her death. I knew it was going to be young. And I literally, that moment changed. We had a good relationship, but my respect for her and my devotion really to her had really changed, because I really believed that she was going to leave at a young age. So then at 33, when I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I heard the message that she got cancer, I was like, oh, this is it. Though I will say that when I went through the process with her being a primary caregiver, I was fully believing that she was going to beat cancer, because I don't think anything's set in stone. I think how we interact, our energy, what we do, can we change our destiny? Yeah, absolutely. Nothing's written in stone, kind of deal. But, that's what I use. That's why I talked to you earlier. I said, I do these intuitive readings for clients before we do my 4-month program. And so, it's something I want to offer your audience. So, if you text the word voices or voice, what doesn't matter, whatever works, just text it to me at 760-835-3327. Again, just text voices to 760-835-3327. As long as I'm alive and well and 6 feet above ground, I said, I will text you back. And this is a complimentary intuitive reading. It's what I do, for all prospective clients, but just for people, because I want you to have something. And I've plotted this on an Excel spreadsheet. I just did 3 this past 2 days. I'm about 86% correct, right? And what we do is, it just whatever comes up. And for me, I share with clients, there are 4 things that come up: the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful, because that's our life.
Yeah.
That's our life.
There's so many different ways I could go from here. I'm not sure which to go. Maybe your intuition will lead this conversation where it should go. Because you've given a tip, like, don't, for grievers, is to not grieve alone. And
Yeah,
that's,
do not do it alone. Get
yeah.
somebody.
Um, one of the best pieces of advice you ever received while you were grieving was?
I would say the best piece of advice that I received when I was grieving, because I got so many, I would say, here's what I'll say. I remember when I was doing the grief group, and this woman, this was at a hospital in Glendale, it's like a couple miles down the street. And this woman was incredible. I don't even know if she's still with us, but um, I went and I went for my first group, right? And so I'm fresh off the death of my mother, right? So a lot of you who might be listening are fresh off the death of a loved one or a person that you've lost. So I sat there and I was nervous, I mean, I was a former actor and such, but I was like, okay, this is the real deal. This is not acting. This is the real stuff here. And so she said, hey, welcome everybody. This is our Tuesday night, 7 to 9, la, 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 la. Um, if you're new, if you don't mind, could you just raise your hand? So I was like, okay. I raised my hand. She says, so we're just gonna, just gently. I mean, her words were wonderful. I mean, I'm an English major and communications major. We're just gonna gently go around the room. And if you could just, if you're open, just say your name and maybe, a sentence of why you're here. Right. I was like, okay. So there's about 5 or 6 of us that were brand new. And so I was in the back and I just remember listening 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they got to me. And I was in this trance because I just was like all the feelings and emotions about my mother were coming up. And she said, could you share your name? And I didn't hear her, like I didn't even see her. And she said, sir, do you mind? Are you okay with sharing your name? And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I said, yeah. I said, my name is Brent Scarpo. She said, are you open to sharing with us why you're here? And I took this moment and I just went through the entire 2.5 years of caring for my mother. And I said to her, I said, I'm here to do on a full-time basis what I've only done part-time. And that's finally take care of me. And just tears streamed down my face. And I remember she came over and she put her hands gently on my shoulders. And she said, that's why we're all here. We are here to finally have the opportunity to take care of ourselves and what this journey is about, and to give permission to feel, to give permission to look at the loss that you just went through. And so I think my advice to you is just to give you permission to go on this journey, to give you permission to take care of yourself full time, to give you permission to be able to seek out those resources and say to, the people that are pulling you in different ways, no, daddy's going to go to this group. This is something I have to do. And give yourself permission to take care of yourself and do for yourself what you did so wonderfully for the person that you cared for.
Well, and in the process, especially if you're a parent and have children, you're setting an example of how important that is.
Right. All modeling the behavior. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
what has your grief taught you?
Well, it's funny because I was vacillating between 2 words of wisdom. Here's what I'll share with you. What it's taught me is, because halfway through the process, this is probably the number 2 bits of wisdom. She said, and it's just so true. And somebody was having a particularly difficult time, and she said, "Look," she said, "this is hard work. I'm not gonna mess around." She said, "But I am gonna make you a promise." She said, "Because I know a lot of you are feeling like you're just this train going through this dark tunnel, that has no light, and that just keeps going and going and going and going. And you come week after week after week after week, feeling pain after pain after pain." But she said, "Here's my promise to you. If you continue to do the work, to get on the train, to go through the dark tunnel, to feel the pain, I promise you that at some point in time, you will see the light. And in the light are the gifts. And those gifts are being sent by the person that you're grieving over. And you're going to open up those gifts, and it's going to be pure joy." And it took about 2 years, but all of a sudden the train came out, and I saw the light, and I saw the gifts, and I opened them up and I felt the joy.
I'm going to ask you a question because intuitively I want to know the answer, but I think it would be helpful to others listening. If I would have known you then, and even a year and a half, a year into the group you were going to, and I'm not bashing group supports systems or group programs and by any means. I think you found support in it. It helped you. I'm not saying that they're wonderful for people. But if I would have said to you, if you want to work one-on-one with me and I can help you in eight sessions, what you've worked through in 2 years, would you have believed me?
Well, I actually did it. So when hospice came, they said, look, they gave us all these kinds of resources. So there's this group, and then there was one-on-one. And here's what I knew. Here's what I did. So I was a casting director at the time. I was casting Shawshank Redemption, Air Force One. The last movie I cast before my mother passed away was Matilda, right? I hired 3,000 children and worked with the funniest guy named Danny DeVito. So then this is what I did. During the 2.5 years that I was my mother's primary caregiver, I opened up a separate bank account. And I put enough money away for every month that I was her caregiver and that she had cancer so that I could take that much time off.
Oh,
I
that's
know.
another great tip.
Another tip. Another tip. But I remember just saying, you know what? Because I thought if this should go wrong, I'm going to have to be able to deal with some stuff. And I don't know if I really want to go to work and pretend to cast children in a Cheerios commercial and be happy about it. So I had 2.5 months of salary, and I took a year and I didn't work at all. When I say I took care of myself full time, I wasn't playing, but I planned it. That's why I'm telling people this is the biggest tip: is you got to plan for this ahead of time. The red balloon was done years and years before I had the dream that she had cancer. I mean, all this can be planned, and you can get the joy out of that. And so I did the group. We met once. I did two. I did twice, and then I was so impressed with her. I went to her once a week. Right now, I went to her once a week for about a year. Now, if you say to me, in 8 weeks, if you meet with me, I guess it depends on what you're saying to me. In 8 weeks, you work with me, your grief will be over. I probably would have
Not
been
over. Your grief won't be over.
Oh, okay.
It's just that every emotional thing that's keeping you bogged down and keeping you stuck and keeping you from living your fullest potential because you're emotionally incomplete in some way, that would be resolved.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, look, I have a 4-month life coaching program, and I specifically did 4 months because, I worked with a lot of people with addiction and such, and these 90-day and 30-day programs, scientifically, we've discovered that they don't work, right? It takes at least 90 plus days to change a behavior. It just does. I mean, all the research is out there, whether it's an emotional, psychological, physical, but whatever the case may be. So, you're looking at 2 months. Knowing back then, maybe I would have said, yeah, let's go ahead and do this, but I would have gone on probably a while because I had made that plan. But I'm of the proponent that, if you're going to do something one-on-one, just because of all the research I've read, you want to do it for at least, 4 months. That's why I do my program. It's 21 sessions, right? 21 sessions, and I guarantee you'll be transformed in some shape or form. I've got all the testimonials on my website, which is brentscarpo.com. And because it just takes that much time to get, it's like the onion, you peel back the onion, there's always layers and layers and layers and layers. So I hope that answers your question.
No, I personally was just curious what your answer would be, because I find though, because the grief recovery method is evidence-based.
Right.
Kent University did a study, and what I'm finding is that it can be really difficult for people to believe that it's possible, even that you can't, you know what I mean, that you can't even get to. So like someone who's going through grief, like going to a support group where there isn't necessarily action, like you're not taking action. And I think too, it depends on the facilitator. But if you because I've heard many people say to me about the grief group sometimes is that you almost feel worse when you leave because it's such a
Oh,
heavy,
look, I agree with you
yeah.
100%. I think I'll give you an example. In fact, I may carry you with me because I'm going to go let the dog in. Is You've got to figure out what device works best for you, right? It is pardon me. uh, I'm working with a client whose mother committed suicide, right? And so it will be a year, 2 years ago yesterday. And I said, what are you doing to deal with your grief, right? And so he's like, well, I started this group, but I don't know if I really want to go to therapy. I was like, okay, gotcha, right? Well, I know him well enough because I've worked with him 3 times. So if he does therapy, he knows he's going to have to get to it. He's not ready.
Hmm.
He's not
Yep.
ready. Let me just sit in the back here. Now he's also a man, right? But he's sensitive enough to where he's open because men grieve differently. They're like, they lose their child, and 2 weeks later they're back at work, and the wife is like, "What are you doing?" Right? Because women grieve with expression and emotion and feeling, and men keep it inside, and they have to be busy and doing things so that they can process what it is that they're feeling. So I think you bring up a really good point. Not only choose not to do it yourself, but choose the venue and the way that works best for you. Right? Maybe it's therapy one-on-one and that's it. Maybe it's group because you like being around people and such.
Hmm.
Maybe it's a combination of the two. There's probably modalities out there that I'm not even familiar with. I know. Well, no, I mean I know people that have had Reiki. They've had the energy. They've had I knew one woman who she really didn't do therapy per se, but once a week she did something for herself. So I got a massage, I got a facial, I just did something to make me feel better, because the other 6 days she was grieving. So there
Hmm.
was that self-care that she was able to do for herself rather than find herself plummeted in the depths of grief so low that she couldn't get out of it. So yeah, I think well, here's a great example. So my client goes to group, right? And I said, "How's that going?" He said, "Because I don't know." And he's, this is something brand new to him because he was an only child. I said, "What are you getting something out of it?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "But I just feel like I'm unique." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, other people, they've lost a child, or, the grandmother died, or the grandfather died, or the husband died, or whatever. It's like, my mom died. She killed herself." Right? I said, "That's all you got to say." So then I Googled and I found a group that is specific for everybody there. Their lost loved one had committed suicide. So he went to that and he said, "That's a world of difference. Just a world of difference." He said, "Thank you."
Yeah, and I think there can be dangers in that too, though, because
Sure.
we can definitely learn from all people that have experienced all types of losses. And I think that's kind of what we do too. It's even if, depending on what your loss is, you might say, well, why am I feeling so bad? They lost their child, or,
Right.
and so we naturally can do things like that too. That's where again, I think it depends on the group and the facilitator and
Absolutely.
how,
That's
yeah.
exactly right. I think I was lucky. I mean, when this one was, I mean, she was, I won't say world renowned, but she was state renowned. Like she was it. And so to your point, I think you're right. It's like, um, I mean, he went to the one group and didn't like it. So I was like, "Well, don't stay." He said, "Well, I'm trying to." I said, "No, if this is not working for you, there is a path. We just have to figure out which one it is for you, because not all things work for all people. We just have to figure out what it was, and then through my work with him, we were able to find it. And he did that for the first year, and then he was fine. He's like, "I've done it. I'm doing this, and um, I'm working now with him because I kind of worked with him at the tail end of that, and I'm working with him for another year. And so I'm doing something much different, because now we're in year 2. This is the second year yesterday. Uh, so one of the things I said to him, which I do with all my clients, no matter if they're going through grief or not, and I said, okay. He said, I want you to attend this class. And so I sent him the class. He said, really? I said, yeah. I said, just go to it and see what happens. Well, I think the greatest class any human being can take for all things is an improv class. I've taken
Mm,
dozens and dozens and dozens. You want to learn how to do sales? Take an improv class. You want to learn how to ask out a woman or a man on a date? Take an improv class. If you want to get uh, better your communication skills, take an improv class. So he said, I don't know. And I said, no, just, it's free. Just go check in on it. So he went, and I know they bring you up on stage. And I said, just text me when you're done. Well, it was done. I didn't get a text. So I texted him, didn't get nothing back. Then finally, like 2 hours later, he texted me. He said, I stayed for the 2 classes afterwards. I said, oh, I said, okay. And then we talked the next day, and I said, what'd you think? He said, you know what? Thank you for sending that to me. He said, my biggest challenge is I don't think I'm allowed to laugh without my mom. He said, and all of a sudden I found myself laughing, and I almost felt guilty about it. But then I was like, maybe this is okay. Well, that was my mindset from the very beginning, that why I sent him, but I couldn't tell him that. So now he signed up for the class and the course, and, making those transitions as far as, the various, for lack of a better word, stages that he's in when it comes to grief and such. Because, how do we learn to laugh without the person we used to laugh with?
mhm.
Well, it takes practice. You got to have the right, so that's not a grief group. That's not therapy, right? That's an improv class, and I'm all about it.
That's another great tip.
Yep, yeah. Is
Oh, I lost sound again.
that better?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's another great tip.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Everybody should take an improv class. Everybody. I took them when I was in acting school, and then um about 3 years ago, I decided to take them again for some odd reason. I went to like some really, we've got some famous ones in Hollywood, but it was funny because I went and I said, I've been to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. I graduated for 2 years. I said, I probably will start like level 5 or level 6. He's like, yeah, you're starting all over. I was like, I am? He said, yeah, it doesn't matter where your past experiences are. We start you at the beginning. I was like, okay, sure. So, and it was fine. I totally got it, because the idea is to, you know, build this cohesion of a group of people that have the ability to speak and listen, listening being the most important part.
Exactly. And I just want to circle back to what we've been talking about with groups and programs and things like that. And I think that's the most important thing to take away from this conversation is that to meet yourself where you're at
Mm,
and what you're ready for. And I think when you're ready to hear it, you'll be open to it, whatever it is.
yeah, I think um, yeah, there's a lot of weight to what you just shared, but there's also then those people who, maybe they're by themselves or they're isolated and such. And so they just, for some reason, the people, places, and things aren't in their lives to kind of nudge them along to the possibility that that's the group that I worry about,
Mhm.
that may not have that support group or don't have the ability to reach out or can't ask for help. Those are the ones I'm really concerned about the most. I mean, that's the beauty of, you know, grief groups and grief therapy back in 1997 when my mother died, and now you can do this on Zoom. We with COVID, I mean, when COVID happened, he was saying, he said, no, we couldn't get together, we had to do it on Zoom. And that was sort of his transition of not doing it anymore because it just wasn't the same, right? It just was not the same. And a lot of people that, especially people who suffer from addiction and are going through that, COVID was it's been very difficult because you and I are talking, we're having a great time and such, but I still can't hug you,
Mhm.
and having that one-on-one. So yeah, if you can, get to the place of knowing that you need some help, and then you can get to the place of researching it, which we're able to do in the confines of our home, which is great. We got this thing called computer, but then take the action step that I'm talking about, to do the Zoom or make the call or have whatever it is. That's the most important piece, because that piece is what then tells you, where am I in the process?
Mhm.
What, versus I'm not going to do anything at all.
Yeah, and I think you'll discover what you're ready for in that
Sure.
process of taking
Sure.
action, right?
Yes,
Of asking for
absolutely.
help. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, what gives you the most hope and joy for the future?
What gives me the most hope and joy for the future? So it's more of the word hope than anything else. So, for example, this last year, really, I've merged my life experiences in the entertainment industry with my life experience as a life coach. So, one of the greatest films out there is, The Shawshank Redemption. I was one of the assistant casting directors, one of the best 4 months of my entire life. I've seen the movie over 1,000 times. And so, I realized there's just so many great lessons from that film. And it's the reason why it's one of the top 10 films out there. And so, I went through the whole film and I came up with the 10 top lessons that one can learn, from the Shawshank Redemption when it comes to life. So, let's go through a few of those. And because to answer your question, I remember when we had the 10th anniversary and Frank had sent us a brand new poster. So I put it up next to the old poster that I've had for years, but I never really looked at it. And so I will tell you why Shawshank Redemption is one of the top films that everybody to this day still loves. It's because of the caption of the poster. And this answers your question. The caption of the poster in the film is this: fear will keep you prisoner. Hope will set you free. Fear will keep you prisoner. Hope will set you free. And so for me, it's not what is it that I think is going to happen when it comes to what is it that I hope for. But for me, it is the essence of hope. I think it's why we're having the difficulties that we've been having for the last 5, 6, 7 years, right? If we've lost the ability to believe that there's this thing called hope. And so when you lose that ability to believe in this thing called hope, then what happens is fear takes over. Fear will keep you prisoner. Hope will set you free. I spoke at this one university one time, and I don't know what the question was, but I remember responding saying, well, the truth will set you free, right? And I had this aha moment. And whatever the question was, that was one of the answers, says the truth will set you free. I said, and let's bring it back to the grieving process. Do you know who her cousin is? Right? I'm just saying this. This is like the intuitive. I don't even know what's about to come out of my mouth. And they all kind of looked at me. I said, the truth will set you free, but her cousin is the truth hurts. And typically the truth has to hurt in order for it to set you free. The grieving process. We've got to go through the dark tunnel and the pain in order to receive the light and the gifts. Right. And so for me, it's the entity and the essence of hope, to know that hope is always a possibility, to know that hope is something that you can wrap your arms around, to know that hope is always an option, and that you don't have to live in fear, and you don't have to bestow fear on other people, and you don't have to generate fear, which I think we've been doing so much in the last 5 to 7 years, right? That people have made their mantra about fear than their mantra about hope. And so it's not what I hope for, it's that there is hope.
Yeah, and that's why that's a big part of this podcast, is to show people that no matter who you are in life, people of all walks of life have been on this podcast. And the one thing that every guest has understood and clung to at some point in their life was that hope. Like hope there is hope that tomorrow could be better, will be better, can be better.
Yeah, all the above, right?
Yeah.
It's absolutely, and we've lost that in a lot of ways. I think COVID exacerbated the situation, especially when we want to be in so control of our lives, right? And then something comes into our lives that you completely lose control, right? That's when that concept of faith is being tested, when your faith in hope is being tested. And if you lose that faith and hope, well, then you automatically go to fear. Again, fear can hold you prisoner, hope can set you free. One of the other it's a great scene in the movie, right? And again, to your point, because I remember sitting there watching the scene happen when Andy Dufresne's character, is having a difficult time being in prison for all those years for something he did not do, right? I didn't sign up to lose my mother. This was not a group I volunteered for. It happened, right? It happened. And I'm part of a group that I did not volunteer for. I didn't want to be a member, and I did not pay dues. But here I am, right? And so his friend Red, starts to worry about him. And I remember just seeing, the character turn. He said, well, I guess it comes down to two things: either get busy living or get busy dying.
Mm.
Well, exactly. Right. I mean, when COVID happened, 2 years ago, and I had a lot of clients, and look, I freaked out. I'm human just as much as everybody else. And then my clients were coming to me. My one client, she had lost all three of her jobs in 72 hours because they're all related to the restaurant business. 3 jobs in 72 hours gone. And I said, well, you got two choices, right? And I said, you can either do the time or the time can do you. Pick one. Right. I did 168 projects in my place in that 2 years, right? Because my whole life, like everybody else, was just, decimated on some levels. And so you either get busy living or get busy dying. You either get busy dying and live in the fear, or you get busy and living and relish in the hope.
Yeah, and I think you turn on the news. That's probably one of people's biggest mistakes, is turning on the news.
Ugh.
First 3 minutes is nothing positive.
There's
It's like,
and then another 6 hours of nothing positive. Yeah, I
right? If
try.
you want, if
Yeah,
you want one thing to chip away at your hope, just keep the news on.
right. It's difficult. I know I hadn't watched the news for years. I'm not I really haven't. And then there was a certain time 4 or 5 years ago that I almost felt like I had to, because there was so much change happening in such a high rate that I wanted to kind of be abreast of kind of what was going on. But I saw how it changed me, but I also had to really modify how much I look at it. Now I'm back to not watching it because we can get it from so many other places and such. But yeah, it is, I always tell my clients, you create your own reality, right? You create your own reality, however that reality exists for you, and whatever choices and action steps you take is what that reality is about. One of the concepts of the 10 Shawshank lessons is that opportunities can be seen everywhere. You just have to look and you have to listen, right? I mean, if you look at that movie, here's a prisoner and he wants to build a library in the prison in 1947. And the ward's like, you can't do that. He said, well, I'll write a letter to the state for the funding if you don't have it, right? He writes a letter for how many years? And then finally they send him a check saying, please stop writing, right? That goes back to, for me, number 3. You've got to be relentless and you got to be tenacious in your life, right? It took him 20 years to escape Shawshank Redemption, with a tiny rock hammer, right? He wrote 1 letter a week for years to get the books in the library. So we need to stay on course, find that support system, especially when we go through the grieving process, because you're going to have those peaks and valleys. This is why the 2 words exist in the English language. And so when you find yourself down the valley, you have that support system that can help you and take you by the hand to get you back up on the hill or the mountain. I'll tell you, I've only told this once in my life. This is interesting, but I'm looking at number 9, and that's practice random acts of kindness. So for me, my mother was having cancer, and I just had to do something. Like I love random acts of kindness, but I was insanely busy. I mean, I was 24/7 with her. I was casting films. We had ups and downs depending on what was going on in the process of her cancer. And for some reason, I've only said this twice. I uh, I decided that once a week, I would send money anonymously to a person that I found in the phone book, because my mailbox was down the street and I picked up my mail there. And this is when you actually had phones that you put quarters in, and and I remember, oh no, it was inside the post office because I had to look up an address. And I just saw all these names of all these people. And so I created this letter saying, you don't know who I am. I'm synopsizing. You don't know who I am, but I'm currently, assisting my mother with cancer. We're very hopeful. Again, I know that was in there. I know this is not much, but I hope this brings a little sense of hope to your life. And I put in $5 each time, and I did that once a week for the entire time she had cancer. And that was just a tool that I used for me. It helped me be hopeful. I was practicing a random act of kindness. It was something that I could do that was outside of being her primary caregiver. But that's just what I did.
Yeah, another tip.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Is there anything else that you would like to share?
I would just say, thank you for all that you do. Again, if you want an intuitive reading, it's completely complimentary. I guarantee you that you'll have tools that you can take away from it. It's about 45 minutes to an hour. Just text me, at 760-835-3327 voices. My website is brentscarpo.com, BRENTSCARPO.com. The book, The Red Balloon's coming out Mother's Day. I'm so excited about this. I've been working on this for 10 years. It is going to be a life coaching book. It's about the relationship between my mother and I. It talks about how we proved that there, in fact, was life after death. And if you're interested in seeing the Today Show episode, you just have to go to YouTube and put in Brent Scarpo, the Today Show.
Well, and I'll put all of that in the show notes as well.
Yay. Well, thank you so much for everything. This was wonderful. I really appreciate you and all that you do. And I know it's really hard work doing this because I've been asked to do it. And I was like, no. I was like, I know how much is involved. Maybe one day down the road, because I think it would be something fun to do. But I've been on several, and you're great at what you do. And I just want to thank you for what it is that you do for me and for us and for all those that are going through the grieving process.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing
Absolutely.
all that you shared. And remember, when you unleash your heart, you unleash your life. Much love.